So yeah, welcome guys. My name is Ophelia. I'm going to just be darting around a little bit as I admit people as they come in, so bear with me. My name's Ophelia. I coordinate the Arum Lily Blitz along with my colleague Ben Howe, and I'm joined today by Rick Ensley, Arum Lily Blitzing extraordinaire. And I just want to acknowledge that we are meeting or dialing in today on Wadundee Budja. We're currently in Makuru. It's actually a really beautiful, sunny winter's day today. And joining us from Albany, from Kinjarling, is John Moore, senior scientist from DPIRD. John Moore is the co-author of Southern Weeds and Their Control, which I think I have a copy here. You're all probably quite familiar with this wonderful Bible of weed control, but also just has 30, 40 years of experience and has a lot of knowledge to share on Arum Lily. So we're very lucky to have John today. I recognise that many of the crew joining today are spray contractors or people undertaking Arum Lily control in their professional work or coordinating Arum Lily control on public land. So the idea of today was really to provide an opportunity for everyone to come together at the start of the spray season and ask any questions that they might have for John. But we are recording this chat as well, so if you'd rather not be forever captured on YouTube in this video, just switch off your camera. Cool. And we are expecting quite a big group. We've got about 30 people registered for the webinar today, which is fantastic. Just to kind of ensure things go smoothly, it looks like everyone already has, but if you could just pop your microphone on mute. And when we get to the question segment after John's presentation, I just ask that you write your questions in the chat pane. So you'll find the chat in the top toolbar. There's an icon that says chat. Just pop your questions in there, and at the end, I'll go through and direct those to John one by one. Just because we do kind of have limited time today, whilst John has enormous knowledge about weeds in the southwest generally, we just ask that you keep your questions focused to Arum Lily if possible. Thank you. And if you do have questions about other weeds, I'm sure John would be happy to answer those if you'd like to send a follow-up email. Cool. If anyone does have issues finding the chat pane or accessing that, plan B, just click on the raise your hand icon, and we'll get to you that way. Cool. Great, but otherwise hold your questions till the end, pop them in the chat box, and John, take it away.
Thank you. Can you all see the shared screen there with this paddock of Arum Lily in the Albany area and a cursor bouncing across it? Give us a thumbs up if you're right.
They might not be able to do that, John.
No, they can thumbs up. No, mate, just with your finger.
Oh, yeah, okay, great. Cool.
That's right. No, there's no icon for a thumbs up. It's just your dinky die finger. Okay. The reason I put this one up was this is taken basically last year, and there's a paddock in Albany. 10 years ago, there was no Arum Lily in Albany apart from a little bit at Strawberry Hill Farm, so just a few plants there. Since the demise of the APB and people controlling it all the time, it has moved very quickly along the coast to the Albany area, and this is sort of that's basically a paddock that would have had none at all. It's all bird spread. The ones in the middle of the paddock there are spread by water birds rather than tree birds. So it's not normally they sort of end up under trees and those sorts of things. But basically anywhere birds go, they'll be eating the seeds and spreading them across. And that's just jam. There you go. Sorry. See Genevieve's online as well. This is straight out. This is on Nick straight out of Genevieve's submission to the Arum Lily and the Nuke program, and it's showing our current distribution there in the blue dots. And then over on the other side is a potential distribution where it's going to go. So in Western Australia, we've still got quite a good chance of stopping it spreading right across the south coast in the sort of the wet, frost-free sort of area. So that's the spot where it's going to be worse. So there is still good reason for certainly containing it as much as possible, because there's still plenty of Western Australia to do. In the east coast, there's lots of dots, but by and large, it hasn't spread too far from those dots. So even the east coast, it's got a good chance of being able to do something pretty useful over there. I'm just going to go through sort of from the ground up as to where arum lily sits. And the main reason for doing that, seeing most of the guys here are either interested in controlling it or spraying it or doing physical things on the ground, the closer things are related, the harder it is to kill them. So if you've got something like a radish and a canola, because they're both brassicas, it's really hard to kill radish and canola. It's really hard to kill grasses and wheat because they're both grasses. Arum lily sort of down in the monocots, so by and large, we don't have too many native plants are there, so it gives us a fair chance of actually getting arum lily control without hitting everything else. So starting from the plot there, you've got animals and plants, and it goes through to the vascular plants and the plants with seeds, down to the flowering plants, which split off into the dicots, which are normal flowering things you have in the garden, and the monocots, which are the grasses, the lilies, the rushes, and the sedges. So it's sort of down the monocots thing. The unfortunate thing down there is as the monocots aren't particularly closely related to each other, which means that things that work on one monocot may not terribly work very well on the other monocot. So things that kill grasses just don't kill arum lily, and things that kill arum lily often don't kill grasses. So the arum lily there is in the Eraceae. You can control it with sort of a spray seed and 2,4-D or bipyridols and the hormone herbicides. But the hormone herbicides have no effect on the grasses or sedges. And the greens and the allies sort of work on the bridal creepers, and the arum blues again have no effect on the grasses or the sedges. And in the rest of the family, the iris family is the other big family that has lots of weeds in it. And again, there 2,4-D works really nicely on the Cape tulips down here, but very little effect on the Watsonias up the top there. But Roundup works on the Watsonias; it doesn't work on the arum lilies. So it is really hard to actually extend your knowledge sort of outside the bulbous plants. So you've got the Alligaceae and the Asparagaceae and the Iridaceae and the Liliaceae. They're all flowering bulbs, and you'd think they'd all be killed by the same sorts of things, but by and large they can be quite specific in what kills them and what doesn't. So it does make life a bit harder. You just got to go out and try things for yourself, and just because it doesn't work on Cape tulip, that doesn't mean that it's not going to work on arum lily and vice versa. By and large, the preferred herbicides are glyphosate, which is a Roundup, but that's pretty poor on arum lily for some strange reason. And then the allies and the gleans and the brush-offs, the Chlorsulfurons and the metsulfurons are quite good on arum lily, but just have no effect on the Watsonias. So it does make life. But if you've got something that works, stick with it, because chances are it's no good trying to get things from other spots. The sources of information, I put this up again because mostly we sort of searching for information on the chemical control in particular. The label, the label is certainly the Bible. That sort of tells you what the chemical companies are willing to guarantee. So if it's on the label, it'll have all the things there, and it'll give you the things where they're likely to get sued. So if it's going to affect vineyards or something like that, they'll have a vineyard warning on there. If it's going to affect creeks, it'll have creek warnings in there. So the label's a good sort of document to just check out what you're doing is okay. The safety data sheet is all the other scientific information, which is basically just covering the butts of the chemical company. So if some frog has changed its sex in some swamp in Ukraine, then it'll be in the safety data sheet, but they won't make a big song and dance about it on the label. So very often some of the strangest side effects, especially like the side effects you get when you get your prescriptions, you get your prescriptions and then you get all the side effects, and they tend to end up in the safety data sheet. So that's pretty useful, and particularly if you're looking for off-target effects, as well, it's going to affect other animals or dogs or pets or other things that people ask you about. Very often you won't find on the label, but it will be in there in the safety data sheet. There's a bunch of regulatory requirements, which is basically controlled by the government. In the English type governments, that's Canada, Australia, England, those sorts of things, we have regulations which control both how well it kills the target or the weed and how little damage it does to the crop. So we have both crop and weed sort of information under regulations, which then goes to form the label. In the US type jurisdictions, they don't care about whether it kills your weeds or your crops. That's for the farmer and the chemical company to sue each other to see it works. But all the US regulators care about is basically the environment and the toxicity to human health. So if it doesn't affect the environment, it doesn't affect humans, it can come on the market, and then the market works out where it's used and how it's used and how much is applied, etc. So it's a bit of a difference when you sort of start going into those internet sort of things, as to you can get sort of some interesting differences in opinions depending on which jurisdictions are going to. There's some scientific literature is always good, but there's not terribly much of it. There's lots of promotional stuff. The internet media is becoming a major source of information, and half of it's good and half is not, and it's just a case of trying to work through which half is good and which half is not. And you certainly get a lot of regurgitated material and hearsay stuff comes through the internet, and people think things that have seen it. And I guess the bottom thing is that all those sources are biased depending on the audience they're trying to hit, or the barrow they're trying to push. And provided you keep that in the back of your mind, you can probably use all of them quite effectively to get to the spot where you want to get, as far as killing arum lily and not doing too much damage everywhere else. The main arum lily herbicides we've got there is the sulfonyl ureas, which is the chlorsulfurons, which is the gleans and the aims and those sorts of things. Metsulfuron, which is brush off an ally, is the old trade names for it. We use them at about 5 grams in 100 litres, so it's about $1 per hectare, so really cheap control of arum lily with the sulfonyl ureas. And by and large, they work pretty well. 2,4-D is the old recommendation, which we used to use before the sulfonyl ureas came on the market. That's used at about 1 in 100, and that's about $60 a hectare by the time you've gone and sprayed everything. The DPIRDs are the more toxic of the herbicides that are on the market, and they're in that sort of $50 to $100 mark, depending on whether you're using paraquat or spray seed or diquat. They vary a bit between the various mixtures that are there, but they work very well, and they work very quickly, and almost surprisingly good at killing arum lily. The way they tend to work is they burn the top off, and then disease gets into the tuber, and it's actually the disease and the mush and the fungus that kills the tuber rather than the chemical itself. So they can be a bit variable depending on the particular area you're doing it. The big thing affecting the cost of most of your applications is going to be the adjuvants you put into it. So with your sulfonyl ureas, whether you're using BS 1000, which is your normal non-ionic wetters, that's about $20 a hectare. Your pulse is going to be $50 a hectare, and things like uptake, which is an oil plus wetter combination, that's $50 a hectare. So you can see that the adjuvant is going to cost you almost as much as a chemical or more. And so that's where people start getting really interested about how much, what the volume of applications are. And Rick, just before we started, had a question on volumes of applications, etc. So obviously, the less you can put on, the less adjuvant you're using, and that can drop those costs right back, because the majority of the cost is coming from the amount of water you're putting on, which directly becomes the amount of adjuvant you're putting on. So while there's big changes or differences between the cost of the herbicide, the real issue is the cost of the adjuvant, and I guess there's not very much work being done on the particular adjuvants determining which one's best. And certainly when you look at things like the sulfonyl ureas, you'd sort of wonder what you're probably better off just doubling the rate of the chemical rather than adding $20 worth of extra adjuvant into the system. And the reason I say that is that It's rare that the adjuvants actually improve the control by more than 30%. So if like so metsulfuron at 5 grams with the best adjuvant you can find on the market is probably about the same kill as 7.5 grams by itself, and 7.5 grams is going to cost you $1.20 compared to $21. So when you get into those cheap things there, having a look at rate, even though you might say, well, it's not spreading very well, you're making up for it by the fact that it's, and I'll do a bit on dose response in a minute, hopefully. Just going through the chemicals themselves, and again, I sort of put these together because these are the sorts of questions that people are asking you as contractors as to what it's doing and where it's going and what the off-target effects are. Metsulfuron hydrolyzes in water, which is bad from your point of view, because if you've got a spray tank full of it and you leave for a week, about half of it's gone. So if you've got stuff you've been kept for a while, you've got to top it up with a bit more chemical. The nice thing about that is it won't get into water tables, because soon it gets in a water table, it hydrolyzes and it's gone. So that's a nice thing about having hydrolysis. It's bad news if you haven't sprayed your tank full out, but it's good news in as much as it's not going to be a water table issue. And if it gets into creeks and rivers and those sorts of things, it breaks down very quickly. In soils, it's pH dependent, and that becomes more important as you go to the west coast, where you've got a lot of limestone around. If you're going into limestone areas, the metsulfurons and the chlorsulfurons will last sort of many months, and some of those are going up to like 140 days. That's like a 6-month half life. So if you're going to particularly pH 9 type soils, it will hang around for a fair amount of time. Which is good for weed control, but not good if you're trying to grow other things on that particular patch of ground. Microbes break it down, and that just depends on how much organic matter is in the soil. It's reasonably mobile, so it'll wash through the soil, so you get a bit down into the root system, which is pretty nice, and it means higher rates work a bit better than lower rates, because you're getting both leaf uptake plus a bit of root uptake, and very low toxicity. And chlorsulfuron is gleaned. As the one we did the original work was on chlorsulfuron, similar to metsulfuron, but it lasts longer in the soil. And by and large, we'd actually prefer to use chlorsulfuron rather than metsulfuron. The reason metsulfuron has become so popular, particularly in the Arum lily areas, is that metsulfuron kills bracken, and most people had metsulfuron in the cupboard, and so they'd sort of use their metsulfuron to control the Arum lily. But if you're doing Arum lily and nothing else, or you're going out to buy a packet of something for Arum lily, chlorsulfuron is probably the better choice compared to metsulfuron. But if you're a hobby farmer and just want one can in the shed, the metsulfuron does more things than take out your scrubs and your blackberries and your other woody type weeds. So metsulfuron is essentially a woody weed type killer, and chlorsulfuron sort of a herb type killer, soft leaf type things. So as contractors, probably chlorsulfuron is the way you want to go. Whereas and chlorsulfurons are less toxic to bush. So if you're spraying, because they occur in bush type areas, the chlorsulfuron is probably slightly safer on the bush. And as you see, metsulfuron is called brush off because it kills brush. And of course, that's very often the sorts of spots where you're likely to be using it. Roundup. Basically with Roundup basically binds to clay really strongly. You can't get it off without breaking it. So its half-life is really hard to determine because it's just unavailable. So it's still there on the clay, but you just can't get it off. So it's not available. It can persist in clean water. So if you put in your tank with rainwater, it'll last there for many months without any problems. In stream water, it's not too bad. It breaks down with a few days if you've got sort of a normal stream with a bunch of other microflora and fauna and fungi and other microbial stuff in the stream. So in streams, it's not too much of a problem, but in very fresh water or very clean water, it does last a long time. And it does have a little bit of degradation with light when it's in water. So again, if it's out in streams or out in dams, we get some degradation where you wouldn't get that sort of thing happening in the tank, which is generally dark. The 2,4-D, again, it's nice. It hydrolyzes, not as quick as metsulfuron, but it breaks down in streams pretty well. It lasts reasonably well in pure water, so if it's in the tank, you can keep it there for a month and it'll still look okay. Whereas metsulfuron would be gone in a week. In soils, it breaks down pretty quickly, so it doesn't last long in soil. The microbes in the plants very often, most of it's absorbed by the roots or the leaves of the plants, and it's broken down within the plants itself. It's mobile in the soil, but rarely found much more than sort of a foot deep. So it tends to get broken down before it gets into any depth. A little bit of UV breakdown, but not too much. Again, low toxicity. So all those are nice because they're all low toxicity. The main problem with 2,4-D essentially is it causes hormone symptoms at very low rates. So if you get a bit of drift onto your vines or your tomatoes or your roses or other ornamental type things, they show a lot of symptoms at extremely low rates, and so that's where you run into strife with neighbours, or if you're a contractor with other people seeing the other things curling around them. By and large, curling doesn't cause too many issues apart from just looking horrible. The other thing I was going to go through is the dose response type curve, and I put up the Roundup ones here because these are the ones that people know the best, I suppose. And if you look on the side here, we've got the percentage kill, so no kill at the bottom, 100% kill at the top. And then each of the lines there is either wild oats or clover or eucalypts, which are trees, or tadpoles or water boatmen. And so we haven't really distinguished between Roundup being a particular herbicide or anything. We're just saying it's a chemical in the environment, and this is what it does in the environment. So if you're looking at wild oats, at about, say, 700-800 mils, you get 100% kill of your wild oats or 99% kill of your wild oats, but you get no kill of your clovers. So if you go in at sort of normal agricultural type rates of sort of a litre or so, nearly all your grasses die and most of your clovers don't. So you might get 20% death of clovers and that. And very often you see this, people use that as a bit of a control mechanism in their pastures to try and get rid of their grasses or their prickle grasses and leave their clovers behind. If you keep pushing the rate up a bit above a litre to say 2 or 3, well, that's probably 4 litres about there because that's a logarithmic graph on the bottom. At about 4 litres, you're going to kill all your clovers. So if you put enough Roundup on, it'll die. And that's probably true of Arum lily too. If you put enough on, eventually it'll die. It's just you need to use a lot of it. And at 4 litres, all your wild oats will be dead, all your clovers will be dead. And about 20% of your trees will start to die at 4 litres per hectare. All your tadpoles are fine, your water boatmen are fine. Then when you start getting up to tree killing rates, the 10 litre per hectare rate, and sort of Arum lily is sort of falling in this area and here. So that's starting to say, well, it's going to kill tadpoles and water boatmen, so it's going to have sort of environmental effects in the things. It's that graph there probably should be a long way to the right, because one of the fortunate things about tadpoles is they live in water. When it goes into water, it gets diluted, and so it's really hard to get 10 litres of Roundup onto tadpoles because as soon as you put the 10 litres in there, it's diluting by the puddle that they're sitting in, so it goes back to a litre. So you tend not to have any issues. But if you did have tadpoles that could live on the ground and were exposed to a 10 litre dose of Roundup, or if they fell into the spray tank. If they fell into the spray tank, you'd expect 60% of your tadpoles to die if you put them straight into a 1 in 100 sort of solution in your spray tank. But I say they're protected in the environment because they tend to live in water. And water boatmen are the same sort of thing. They're a lot more tolerant of Roundup than, say, tadpoles are. But if you get enough on there, or if you get into situations which are a bit strange where you're getting a lot of chemical on the things, that it does affect. And that's the sort of thing you'll get coming back off the some of the scientific literature, and certainly off the internet and the Google type literature, is that Roundup's making frogs croak or die, or killing tadpoles. That's all happening because someone goes out there and gets a little jar and fills it up with Roundup, and the frog dies. So it's all about a dose response. So getting the dose right is really important. You want to use a minimum dose that's going to kill the plant you're looking at, and then you hope that the eucalypts and the other things are sort of off to the right-hand side, and they're just going to have either a small effect or no particular effect on it. As on the other one I was going to do, so that was sort of dose response, and basically I suppose if you're putting on, say, 10 litres of Roundup, it's rare that we get more than about 10% of the chemical sort of disappears from where you're actually aiming at and goes elsewhere. So at 10 litres, we might get about a litre of Roundup goes on to the adjoining bush or the adjoining pasture or the adjoining whatever. And this is where he's looking at sort of the effect of 2,4-D, because 2,4-D sort of came under a lot of criticism for drift and killing grapevines and all those sorts of things. So there's a big push by the vineyard industry plus the horticultural industry for 2,4-D drift. So this is 2,4-D high volatile ester, so it's the worst 2,4-D you can possibly get. So it's the one that's got the highest volatility, and you can smell it. In the paddock, if you're standing in the middle of the paddock, you could smell the 2,4-D in there sort of a week after you'd sprayed it. So that's the sort of levels get. And the wind's going from the left over here to the right. And you can see there is drift. So you've got these little bits of canola here that they're starting to show an effect. But once you go about 10 metres, there's just no effect, and that's just this dose response. So here you've got, a kilo per hectare would be about 1.5 or 1.4 of ester and 2 litres of amine. And so at those sorts of rates, you get about 10% drift, which would be sort of 100 mils per hectare, and 100 mils per hectare starts to affect a bit of the canola. But by the time you go out there sort of 10 metres or so, it's not too much of an issue. So drift is something that people are always worried about. And I guess, particularly for Arum where you're doing a lot of hand spraying, hand sprayers do put out a lot of fine droplets. You sort of look at a hand spray and you see all the great big fat rain droplet size things come out of it. But there is a significant amount of these fine droplets which can move in the air pretty much. And probably more than boom sprays. Boom sprays tend to put out a very uniform set of droplets, whereas hand sprays put out a very variable set of droplets. And you've probably seen that when you've got these big sprinklers on, you can be sort of from 100 yards away and you can still be getting mist coming off the big irrigation sprinklers, and that's because they're putting out football-sized drops, but they're also putting out a lot of stuff that micron or less. Once it gets 100 micron, it just becomes fog and it just moves wherever the air's going. So I put that on there for drift because certainly a lot of people, and particularly in your areas, they'll be worried about drift onto their vineyards and horticultural and nursery stock, etc. And provided you're not doing things really silly, by and large, you're not going to have too many problems with drift. And if you want to put that in the chat and say, "Oh, I had a problem here," feel free to share it with the group because it's always nice to know where people are having problems and why they're having the problems they're having. This is looking at the 2,4-D symptoms. These are lettuces which are particularly sensitive to hormone drift. So they're good lettuces here. These ones here are fat lettuces. And what we did there, we actually sprayed the soil, and then we just put a tub of lettuces inside a container, so there was no sort of physical drift on there. That's just the gas coming off the soil and onto those when you've got this tub sitting over the top, so that basically the gas can't escape. So you can get sort of movement from the soil onto the lettuces, but that soil movement, it's probably no more than or probably a foot or 20, 30 centimetres. It's certainly not going to go a metre from even a high volatile version of 2,4-D. You've basically got to enclose it and have lots of soil close by to actually start getting these type of symptoms come up. But I say the symptoms do occur at extremely low levels. This is sort of like the levels that you can smell. So it's parts per million type things going through. So it does respond quite dramatically to very low levels, but doesn't cause much problem. And this is the same sort of thing. This is what we call our 40 species by 40 herbicides trial. So what we've done there is we planted 40 species of various natives. So it's basically one native from each major family out of the West Australian bush, and there's eucalyptus up the top, and there's hakeas and banksias and acacias. There's some acacias there. You can probably recognise the acacia seedlings. So out of those, a litre per hectare, which would be, say, at your 10 litre sort of rates for Arum, which would be an overkill. You might have a litre that goes off as a drift. Out of those 41 species, none of them died. 34 species showed no sort of reduction in symptom or death. And the reason we do it on seedlings is because that determines what the recruitment is. So the survival of the bush is very often determined by how much recruitment you're getting. So it's not the kill of the big trees that's much of an issue. It's the kill of all the little ones that are coming through to replace the big trees as they die from old age. So so for 2,4-D and most of the bush species, we're pretty happy, and that sort of goes back to that very first slide, is that by and large the bush species are not very closely related to the arum lilies. When you go up to 4 litres per hectare, which would be the equivalent of putting on, say, 40 litres of 2,4-D, we've got about half of them are starting to show fairly serious effects at those sorts of rates. So at 4 litres back there, or if you get your arum lily spray and you put it straight over the top of the bush, an aircraft or something like that, or just you didn't care where you sprayed it, you'd expect probably about half of the native seedlings in your bush patch to start showing fairly serious signs of damage, and probably half of them are fine at that sort of spraying over the top rate. So if you know what you got there, you can sometimes get to the spot where you can say, well, this set of species is going to be fine, so we can spray over the top and do all our arum lily control without being super careful about where you go and what you do. And if you're not, you can just go back and be careful. And if you're careful, you're only getting 10% drift, or you're spraying under the trees and that sort of stuff, then you're fine. This is just looking at the 2,4-D on the thing there, and this is just a time lapse of things that was treated there. Curls up like within a day. That's day 2. Within a day, it curls up. It still keeps growing a bit and still keeps curling, and that's just showing the types of symptoms that 2,4-D gives you. So if you start seeing a lot of this cupping of leaves and twisting of stems and all that sort of stuff, that's just saying there's a 2,4-D sort of event has occurred. And the awful thing about that from a contractor's point of view is it happens basically the day after you've walked out of the paddock. So essentially the people know it was you that did it. It's not happening a week later or a month later or sometime later. You're spraying one day and the tomatoes are curling up the next day. But this is the same sort of thing with Roundup. And so you see it on day 1, you spray it, and day 2 it looks fine. Day 3 up to about day 7 doesn't look too bad. So you're sort of well and truly gone by then. Day 6 it's starting to look a bit miserable and starting to spool. Yeah, that's a week after Roundup spraying. So that starts to die, and then sort of by a fortnight, it's basically got to the end of its tether, and it's completely died. And so Roundup being highly translocated, it's killing all the old leaves, but it's also translocating back in and killing the roots and killing the little new. So there's a couple of that's tried to recover by growing a new little leaf out of it, and you'll see the next spray seed one survives in the Roundup because it's transferred around so well. It kills all those new roots as well. Paraquat, which is a biopyridols, the paraquats, the diquats, and the spray seeds. That's on day 1, straight on day 1. And within 24 hours, that's before you get to day 2, you can see all the leaves are shriveling up and dying. So it's a contact herbicide, works very fast indeed, but it doesn't move back into the plant or kill it elsewhere. You can see these little survivor things here. They'll grow out and they'll grow away, and they're quite happy. That plant will probably survive there because the chemical's not being translocated back into the middle of the plant and killing all the stem material or the root material. It basically kills the leaves that it hits. And Rick had a question about coverage, and so with spray seed, coverage is really important, because if you don't cover every particular last bit of the plant, the bits that you don't cover just recover and grow away. Whereas with Roundup, you can sort of just hit a third of the plant, and that translocates all around the plant and kills the so that's the other thing I was going to talk about is inversions. But basically, if you get a drift event, it'll almost certainly be involved with a surface inversion. If you've got drift, you might get drift coming out of the machine or where you're spraying. That might affect sort of 100 metres into the neighbour's place if you're unlucky. When you get into inversion, you can get sort of damage, sort of at several hundred metres or a kilometre away. And so as soon as you get into inversion, you want to start thinking fairly seriously about whether you continue on spraying, particularly if you're using, or you've got plants that are sensitive to whatever you're spraying. And the easiest way to pick up inversions, if you've got the smoke from the chimney is going horizontally instead of going straight up, that's just telling you there's an inversion layer there. And all it's doing is just grabbing all the chemical that you're putting into the air, and it's just concentrating it onto the ground area where all the plants are living, and just sweeping it across the landscape. And particularly if it's going quite slow, it means it's bathed in whatever you've been spraying for quite a long time. Where if the smoke's going straight up, the chemical will be going straight up. All the fine particles of chemical in the air will be doing exactly the same thing as the smoke. The smoke's going straight up. The chemical is going straight up. If it's going straight up, it's not going to affect the neighbour's place. That's just going from 7 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning. At 7 o'clock in the morning, you can see the smoke there is just being held close to the ground. So if you was over here spraying, all you'll find droplets. It'd be basically in that smoke path there and hitting all the neighbours' places. By about 8:30, you can see there, the inversion just means the temperature gets hotter as you go higher. Generally, the higher you go, the colder it gets. So by the time you're up at 747 sort of aeroplane jet levels, you're freezing, whereas on the ground you're well above that. So in this case here, it's 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's a bit below freezing on the ground there, and then it's going up to 43 degrees Fahrenheit at 105 feet tall. So up here it's got 143, and down here it's 28. As soon as you get to neutral conditions, which is happening about 8 o'clock in the morning, you find the temperature's about the same all the way through, and then as the day goes by, the ground temperature will start to heat up with the sun, so it'll be sort of getting up to 40, 50 degrees Fahrenheit on the ground, and there'll be sort of 32 degrees at sort of, say, 10,000 feet. It'll be about freezing at 10,000 feet. It's pretty normal. So that's what we call neutral. And again, there you can see the amount of chemical that's sort of going over here onto the neighbour's vineyard or the tomatoes or his garden, your mum's garden, is quite small compared to the amount here that you've got concentrated right along the ground, because it's getting shifted up into the atmosphere, and it just gets, it's basically dilution. Again, it's the old dose response thing. Here you're getting a big dose for a long time. Here you're getting a little dose for a much shorter time, but you're starting to get a bit of wind that's doing a bit of stirring and just mixing things up. So inversions is probably the spot where you're going to get caught most, and it's not too hard to see. You can see it with the dust on the road. So basically it's from sunset to just after sunrise. So nighttime is an inversion most nights. The ones that cause you problems, there's little or no wind, and that just means that the chemical just bathes the neighbouring paddock or pasture or whatever with chemical for a long time. It's clear to partly cloudy skies, so you don't usually get inversion on cloudy nights. There's fogs around if there's moisture around. There's dust hanging out of the road, checking out, and smoke from chimneys you can see, and dews and frost on the high humidity type areas. So that's sort of basically telling you, seeing those sorts of things, well worthwhile deciding whether you're going to, or going and spraying things where the chemical movement's going to cause issues to the things. The next thing I'm going to look at for the inversion. So stick your questions in the chat there if you've got any questions on what's died on the neighbour's place or what you should be careful of, etc. And we can deal with those later on. I was going to go into the toxicity areas here, and for the DBCA guys, I'm not sure how many DBCA guys here, but any of the occupational health and safety guys, probably time for them to put their fingers in their ears and ignore the rest, because this is sort of going through the science of the toxicity rather than what you should do as good practice. So basically, if you get none on you, you can't cause any problems, and basically the occupational health and safety is aimed at getting none on you, regardless of the toxicity. So the sorts of things we have is the LD50 is just the lethal dose, how much you've got to have to kill 50% of the people or the vines or the plants or the tadpoles, wherever you're looking at. So the LD50s are fairly easy to see. The no effect level is the no observable effect level. So that's the amount of chemical that goes on and you can't see any effect. And actually that could be a positive effect. So if it makes plants grow better by putting on very low rates, which often happens with herbicides, that's still in effect. So there's no observable effect. Has to be even below that level where the chemicals make grow better as well as worse. That's the amount that can be consumed or applied with no observable effect. The ADI is the acceptable daily intake, and that's sort of basically a thing based on what your diet is and how much you're eating and how much you could eat every day of your life with no adverse effects expected. And very often that's sort of it's like 10 or 100 times less than the no effect level, to give you a bit of a and then the maximum residue limit is often quoted, but doesn't have anything to do with toxicity. So the maximum residue limit is the amount of chemical you expect to find in the product when you're using the products normally. So if you're out there as a farmer spraying your crops with Roundup and 2,4-D and metsulfuron or Chlorsulfuron, you'd expect in your pie there'd be sort of 0.001 grams of glyphosate and 0.001 grams of metsulfuron and whatever. So that's just saying how much you would expect under normal conditions that's actually in the produce, in your flour or your bread or your pies or your pasta or your veggies or whatever. And so if it's really telling you that something's gone awfully wrong in the supply chain somewhere if your maximum residue limit has been exceeded. So again, it's nothing to do with toxicity. It's just telling you what is normal sort of transport of chemicals through the food chain. And so that's the maximum amount that should be found in food, essentially. And then the National Residue Survey, they do a survey every year, and they do a whole bunch of things, and very rarely find any issues. And certainly every 10 years or so, they try and say don't do it anymore because it's a waste of time and money. But of course, people are really worried about the food, so they keep doing residue samples to find out how many contaminants are in the food. So, and very often they sometimes, when they pick up things, it's often things that are registered in other jurisdictions in New Zealand or Europe or somewhere, which aren't registered in Australia. And as soon as they're not registered in Australia, our maximum residue limit goes to 0. And so it can just, very often it's sort of like artifacty type stuff, is that something's registered in New Zealand, they use it on their apples, it comes over here, you find a bit in apples, and then that hits the residue limits, because our limits are 0, because we shouldn't be using it in Australian apples. So the residue survey's there, and that's on the internet if people are worried about what's in their food and what contaminants are coming along. And we're going to look at the herbicides and things. So Roundup I've taken as a relatively safe herbicide. So the LD50 is about 1,000 mils, so you need to drink about 5 cups of Roundup before you had a 50% chance of dying. The no effect level is about a wine glass full every day for 2 years, because as long as the experiments go. So I suppose the thing about those is you're not going to get those accidentally by spilling a bit on your fingers or licking your things or putting your sandwiches on the seat of the ute or anything. There is a reasonable amount that has to be consumed before you start running into these toxicity issues. Paraquat, which is the most toxic herbicide that we've got on the market pretty much, that's basically a wine glass full. Will give you a 50% chance of dying. So you could sort of have a wine glass of Roundup, you'd be fine. A wine glass of Paraquat, you wouldn't be fine. And then the no effect level is about a tablespoon per 2 years. So again, at the sort of contamination type levels, it's still not too much of an issue, because it's to be really hard to get a tablespoonful sort of into your body, sort of just from normal picking up drums or sitting in spray utes or those sorts of things. So it's from sort of, I suppose, one of our safe herbicides, one of our toxic herbicides. The insecticides, parathon and nitrothon, have essentially gone off the market, and they're just in different categories. The LD50 is like half a teaspoonful of parathon, half a cup of nitrothon. So you could imagine sort of it wouldn't be impossible to ingest half a teaspoonful some product that you're using accidentally for whatever reason. So and that's essentially why they've been taken off the market. Most of the insecticides these days are in the synthetic pyrethroids, and they're up sort of similar to the toxicities of the herbicide. So most of the new insecticides are considerably safer than the old ones, and some of the old ones were pretty toxic, which is why they have been basically released. So going on from that, okay, so for parrots, so I went through this exercise, and this is for the most toxic herbicide we've got on the market. The oral LD50 is winegrass, and the no effect level is a tablespoon's worth, and accepted daily intake is 0.00. Well, that's the amount that you could consume without any issues, and that's 0.0015. So tiny little amounts is the acceptable daily intake. The maximum residue limit is about 5 milligrams per kilo. So anything you're eating, that should be no more than anything cows and sheep are eating, all the bean shoots or other sort of vegetarian type stuff, shouldn't have more than 5 milligrams per kilogram in the product. So in order to do that, you'd need to eat about 400 kilos of pasture or bean shoots to get up to the no effect level, and about 300 grams of bean shoots or pasture to get up to the acceptable daily intake. So 300 grams, that's sort of like a pound or a double handful of bean shoots. So it wouldn't be impossible to get sort of up to that acceptable daily intake of paraquat. You're still a long way from having any observable effect, but you're sort of at the spot where the bureaucrats in Canberra have said, look, we worked out that the chances of anything untoward happening is well below what people could possibly get. If you're that's the pasture. Okay, here's the MRL for veggies. So the MRL, I think it's 5 milligrams per kilogram. For veggies, which we expect people to eat rather than pasture, it's 100 times less than the amounts you're allowed to have in pasture. So it's 0.05 milligrams per kilo. So in order to get up to the no observable, you've got to eat 40 tons of veggies a day to have any effect, and then 30 kilos of veggies to hit the acceptable daily intake. So again, there's nobody could possibly eat enough veggies to get up to the spot where they're going to cause any toxicity issues. If you're a meat eater, you're even better off, because that's at 0.01 milligrams, and you've got to eat 200 tons of meat per day, or 150. You've got to eat your own body weight in meat or more every day in order to get up to the acceptable daily intake. So you're going to run into other issues well before you start running into pesticide issues. So I'll put
John,
those up. Just
sorry to interrupt, John. I'm just going to give you a quick time check. We're at 48 minutes.
Oh, right, yeah. There we go. Actually, look at that. That's a great time for a check. That's the last slide.
Yes.
Yes. I left the toxicity. I thought you were going to say, stop saying this. You're going to get us all into trouble. And that's Aaron. I'll put that one up there, because that's a nice little pen and ink drawing that John Black did some years ago, and that's where we keep all our interesting stuff about Arum lily and the biology and the chemicals, etc. And it's nice when we just go and do a cut and paste when you put a little logo on the corner of Arum lily things. That's got the nice space there. It's easy to see the typical arrow-shaped leaf with the indented base, and then the little stem there with all the females and the berries down the bottom and all the males on top. Sort of there's a spadix sort of growing down the middle. Each of those is a little flower with a little berry, and they're all male flowers up top and the female flowers down the bottom. Well done. Thank you.
Okay.
Chat time.
Thanks, John. That was fantastic. That was awesome. We've got about 5 questions that have come up in the chat, so I'll just ask them in order. Jocelyn had a question about surfactant in glyphosate in terms of the effects on frogs.
Yep.
So what would be the effect of surfactant in glyphosate? Okay.
It is the surfactants in glyphosate that kill the frogs rather than the glyphosate itself. So glyphosate itself is relatively non-toxic to frogs, which is why you can make aquatic glyphosate, and the aquatic brands of glyphosate are just the ordinary old glyphosate that's got different surfactants in it. So the agricultural stuff's got cheap surfactants in it, which are frog toxic, and the aquatic stuff have got frog-friendly or non-toxic weeding agents in there. It's a bit like sort of dishwashing liquid versus dishwasher liquid, where the dishwasher liquid takes all the skin off your hands, whereas the stuff you put in your sink is not. So there's a whole range of toxicities within the weeding agents. The thing to watch out there most for, there's a lot of people who go and buy Roundup Aquatic or an aquatic version of Roundup, which is safe to use on streams and areas and registered to use on streams and areas, and then they go and put Pulse in it, which is one of the toxic things. So, so it's quite common to see people using Roundup Aquatic and adding Pulse for or BS1000 or one of the other cheap weeding agents, which are the toxic ones. So if you are using Roundup, by and large, particularly for leaf spraying, there's certainly enough wetting agent in the glyphosates to use it. So if you're using the really high concentration, the 850 grams and the powdered forms, you need to add a bit of wetting agent. And if you're using the aquatic forms, then you're better off not adding wetting agent, because most of the stuff you buy off the shelf is going to be a lot more toxic to the frogs and the self. And even the worst agricultural stuff, it's not too much of an issue. So we've done tests on it, and it is you've really got to be in sort of accidental exposures where you've had sort of like a drum of Roundup tip into a dam or something to get anywhere near the concentrations. Certainly at the spraying type levels, you're just not going to run into issues with it. So aquatic stuff, because that's illegal stuff to use. But if you have up, then you wouldn't be too worried about it at the technical point of view, apart from doing illegal things.
Cool. Great. And then we've got a question about, I guess, what is best practice? So we've got a question from Andrew. Are there any particular situations where you would recommend adding 2,4-D into a chlorsulfuron mix for arum lily, or using it as a standalone herbicide?
Okay. The spots where we'd, I suppose, prefer to use 2,4-D is if you're going into the limestoney areas where you're expecting to get a lot of residual and very slow breakdown, and you could get sort of metsulfuron and chlorsulfuron washing through particularly metsulfuron washing through the soil and being absorbed by the roots. And certainly at the arum lily, at 5 grams per 100 litres, that's putting it at about 50 grams per hectare. And at 100 grams per hectare, we can cause yellowing and venation on vineyards. So we have done sort of those very high rate sort of experiments looking at how much can go through the soil. So if you can if you're sort of spraying arum lily amongst vines and you're using metsulfuron at that 100 grams sort of a hectare rate, you'd expect to see a bit of yellowing on the vine. So I guess if you're in limestony areas and using high rates, then 2,4-D would be the preferred way to go. If you're close to vineyards, you generally tend to go for the metsulfurons and chlorsulfurons. The 2,4-Ds work reasonably well. The chlorsulfuron is probably the best, followed by metsulfuron, then 2,4-D, and then Paracot's the nice one because it works very quickly and see where you've been very quickly. The spot where we often put 2,4-D in with metsulfuron is just as a marker. So we'll put in just 100 mils of 2,4-D so we can go back in a week's time and see what we've missed when we were spraying the areas, because if you've got 2,4-D in, it'll curl up within 7 days, whereas with the metsulfuron and chlorsulfuron, you basically don't see any effect of the chemical until the following year, particularly if you're doing it sort of later in the year. It just looks like it's dying normally. So the spot where you'd put in, you wouldn't put in a full dose, you just put in probably a tenth of the dose to act as a spray marker. So instead of using sort of a dye, you could just use some chemical there. That's giving a bit more kill, and it's just as good as having a dye there for going back the next week. Because if you go back the next week, all the sprayed stuff will be curled over and laying on the ground, and all the unsprayed stuff will be sticking straight up. Well, the stuff that's been sort of protected underneath or hasn't been hit with the spray for whatever reason, will be standing straight up. So that'd be about the only time we'd do a mixture.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that covered enough for you, does it, Andrew? Or it's probably on mute, doesn't matter. Next one.
So Question about vectors and what spreads the seeds. Yeah, what species? I mean, we talk about, you know, birds spreading the seed. We've observed emus. Yeah, can you add anything to that, John, in terms of what's spreading the seed?
Yeah. They reckon emus and foxes are very good at it, and basically any of the fruit-eating birds are really good at it. Particular species, haven't actually seen anything done in Western Australia about which particular species are doing it, but certainly, certainly, in the birds that eat fruit, it does pass through birds very rapidly and very quickly. The good thing, I suppose, is that arum lily seed only lasts 12 months, so there's no dormancy, or it doesn't last from 1 year to the next, and so it's basically the birds eat it, spread it, and then in the following season it germinates, and that's the end of it. So if you can stop seed set, you could actually stop movement of the seed. So it's nice in that respect. It's got no dormancy or no long-lived seed in the soil or anything.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty, next question. From Aaron, I understand that you helped advise on an application to have arum lily listed as a weed of national significance. Do you think this is likely to be successful?
No.
Oh.
Yeah. It'd be really nice to get up there. So we keep pushing for it. By and large, and particularly in Western Australia, it tends to be going backwards rather than forwards. We're still trying to hold to hold them and keep it on the list as much as we can. And we have got onto the biological control list for them to have a look at whether they take it on or it goes any further. And I know Genevieve's had a shot at getting it onto the nuke list. Do you want to say anything else about how the nuke's going there, Genevieve? Feel free to unmic and tell us the good news.
Genevieve, I'll just unmic you. Right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now? Oh. Well, we got through the first two stages, so the expression of interest and then the actual nomination, and we were successful in getting shortlisted for the weeds being nominated, but we won't hear anything back about it until the end of the year. Yeah. So that's all I've got to add.
Yeah, that's where I had it. That's one of my jobs this morning, was to go and find out where I was up to. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for putting it up, because it is starting to get a bit of traction over east. The problem with sort of 10 years ago, there was virtually none of it there, and there was a little bit in the national parks, and that was about it. Whereas now it's starting to pop up everywhere, and so it's getting to that spot where there's enough around for enough people to get worried about it. Whereas 10 years ago in the eastern states, you just couldn't get a Guernsey anywhere for it. So hopefully the spread into the east will certainly help us over here, and if we can get some biocontrol, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be excellent if we can get a bit more serious recognition, but particularly some investigation into biological control.
Yeah, that's nice. Carry on.
Next question. We've got Scott. Do I need to wear a mask when spraying chlorsulfuron using a high pressure unit, or is the adjuvant the greater health risk? What is the difference between a wetter, sticker, and a penetrant?
Well, as a professional public service servant, you should dress up like a spaceman every time you pull the cord on your Honda. so yeah, okay. The best thing is not to get it on you. The reality is it's probably less toxic than half things you got in your tea bags or your lunchbox. So the toxicities are really low, but that's no excuse for not having good commercial practice. And you're probably going to get into more trouble with people seeing you not wearing a mask than you are from the chemical the mask is keeping out, because people don't like photographs of people spraying without the full protective gear on. And so as a commercial operator, you almost have to do that sort of thing just to maintain good neighbour relations, because they don't understand the toxicity of what's going on. So the answer there is yes, you should wear it, but no, you don't need it.
Okay. Alrighty. And next question from Ben: what is the likelihood of a biological control being investigated?
Who knows? Who knows? It's not probably not going to be anything sort of normal. So it's probably not going to be an insect, maybe not a disease, but there's a whole bunch of other sort of strange GME DNA type stuff that's sort of coming through the pipeline now, which could be sort of useful, because you can sort of imagine like you had sterile fruit flies, and you could imagine sort of introducing a sterile arum lily to go and breed with all the other arum lilies, so it doesn't produce viable seed or something of that sort of ilk. But yes, certainly people have had a bit of a look at it, and as saying in the little chat before we started, there's some diseases that might affect it. And in the glass houses in the Netherlands and the Scandinavian countries where they grow arum lily as cut flowers, they do have a lot of problem with rhizo in the glass houses, which is the same rhizo that hits potatoes. So while we know there is something that does hit the roots, a disease that hits the roots, it's unlikely to be introduced because of its potential effect on the potato industry. So it's probably just going to get knocked out at round one before it even gets across the border. So I guess because of things like cane toads and other things that people are very wary about introducing biological control. So if it has any effect on any other sort of native species or crop species, it basically doesn't get released. So it has to be very specific, and of course the very specific things very often aren't super effective. So I'm sure within your lifetime you might see it, but probably not within mine.
Be a very exciting day.
That's right.
And a question from Carl: answering as a contractor, private customers sweat when they don't see a result within a month, and so that's when I use 2,4-D.
That's a great idea.
Thanks for that, Carl. Ben has a question: how important is an adjuvant for effective control, or can the rate be upped to compensate to achieve similar results? I think you did touch on this.
Yeah. Basically, you can replace chemical with adjuvant. You sort of start getting into the ethics of whether you're better off putting adjuvant into the environment or chemical into the environment. And they are basically, it's rare that an adjuvant increases the activity of the chemical by 30%. If you get 30% sort of increase in activity, for something like metsulfuron and chlorsulfuron, it means it might be $1.50 versus $1, which is nothing compared to the price of adjuvants. If it's something like spray seed or paraquat or 2,4-D, then if you push the rate up by 30%, that's going to cost you an extra $10 or $15, which is about the same price as the adjuvant. So for the sulfonylureas, the logical mathematician or accountant would just push the rate up, and for the other ones, whether you push the rate up or use more adjuvant. Now, so I suppose for the paraquats and spray seeds, we've got more toxicity associated with them. You might be more inclined to use an adjuvant, whereas in the 2,4-Ds you might push a bit more up, or if you're close to vineyards, you might sort of drop the rate a bit, so you haven't got as much 2,4-D going across the landscape and more adjuvant. So there'd be spots where you'd adjust it a little bit, but there's not too much to choose amongst rate versus it'd be the secondary effects rather than the effects on the arum lily would be the important spots or things you'd be thinking about, I reckon.
Yeah. Awesome. And aside from the herbicides you've talked about, are there any herbicides being trialled?
No, I don't think so. I would say we certainly keep our ear to the ground for all the contractors that are spraying all the other bulbous plants and the lachanalias and the soldiers and the picate tulips and those sorts of things. But there's certainly nothing that jumps out of the woodwork as being particularly useful, and certainly everything in the sulfonylurea and hormone groups have been well and truly tested by now, and and the bipyridols. There's no new bipyridols coming on the market. So I assume there will be products that do come on as time goes by, but there's nothing particularly to change much of the old recommendations at the moment. Even 2,4-D, which was the original recommendation from sort of the 1950s, is still almost as good as the sulfonyl ureas, which is sort of the product of the 2000s. So it's a long time between getting products that are, and it's because it's such a strange sort of family. It's not as though you've got a big sort of wheat, barley, or soya bean or corn, whereas people are doing lots of experimentation or trying to get major weeds. It's not in the major weed family, so you're not getting lots of ryegrass or radish or turnip herbicides or capeweed herbicides. The companies are spending a lot of research dollars on developing. There's I can't think of anything else in the Araceae that's of any significance apart from a few ornamentals, which you can sort of buy. So there's no major crops in the Araceae, and there's no other major weeds in the Araceae.
Yeah. Okay, and then we've heard reports of people adding a splash of glyphosate to their chlorsulfuron mix, I guess to show faster signs of control. Does this have the potential to compartmentalize the rhizome and disrupt effective long-term control?
Not unless they've observed it. I suspect not, but I'm saying you can always learn. if they reckon they've got one side of the plant's died and the other side's survived, that's something that's worth observing or noting. Certainly wouldn't expect compartmentalisation, and certainly don't see it like you do in the trees, where you get lots of compartmentalisation. But by and large, the structure of the monocots is a lot simpler than the structure of the dicots, so there's less less ability for it to occur at a biological sort of a level. If you want to show what's affecting, you're probably better off putting a bit of 2,4-D in there rather than Roundup. And the reason I say that is that Roundup's going to cause you lots more off-target damage than, say, putting 2,4-D in there, and the 2,4-D will show you symptoms quicker. So 2,4-D will show you symptoms in a week, whereas the Roundup will take well, as you saw on the videos there, that Roundup takes a fortnight before you see anything, and it won't show very good symptoms on Arum lily. So if you're going to add something as a marker, you're probably better off adding something that's providing a bit of kill. If you're right next to a vineyard, you might sort of choose to put a bit of Roundup in there, but in most cases I'd sort of go for a bit of extra 2,4-D as the additive. And there's no Roundup and the sulfonyl ureas by and large are just additive, so it's not really getting any synergistic effect. And with the 2,4-Ds, generally, if you're going to have a Roundup hormone or 2,4-D interaction, it tends to be either additive or negative rather than synergistic. So there's not an enormous amount going for it. Well, if you're trying to kill cockee or something underneath, say, or you want to kill, your aloe, kill your bracken. If you had other things just trying to kill at the same time, have no objection to putting Roundup in there to kill other things that are growing in association with Roundup, so you can get back and make it easier to spray for next year. So that'd be a spot where I'd think it'd be useful.
Yeah. Has there been any research on the effect of Arum chemical and surfactants on bees? People who keep bees have been keen to not spray, from my experience.
Yeah, I suspect that's just a precautionary principle. I don't think any of them got particular in the what do you call it, the safety data sheets. There will be a bee toxicity for all of those, and certainly none of those have got particular bee toxicity per se. And the wetting agents again are not particularly toxic to bees. So yeah, no, I suspect they're just, well, okay, they'd be very wary because of a lot of the insecticides are highly toxic to bees, of course, because they're insects. But very few of the herbicides have much bee toxicity at all. So I can't imagine bees being an issue apart from people just being worried about spraying per se. when they're thinking more about insecticide spraying rather than herbicide spraying. Well, and I guess, I suppose, a lot of the farmers will put a bit of insecticide in with their Roundup to kill all the black beetle and the webworms and the other bits and pieces before they plant their crops. So they'll be spraying Roundup, but there'll be a Roundup insecticide mix that they're using. So while they say they're spraying Roundup, and if they're affecting bees, there'll be some insecticide in the mix, which is pretty normal for as a pre-cropping spray.
Cool. And a question from Carl: do the organic approved herbicides have a similar effect as paraquat, being that they tend to be acid based?
The only organic approved herbicide I'm aware of is glyphosate, unless Carl's got a list of other ones. And are they acid based? I don't think so. Can't imagine what it would be, and unless that sounds like one that Carl could give us a ring and we can talk about what he's what he's talking about. Yeah. Basically, organic on organic farms, Arum is a bit of a problem because it's really hard to control with cultivation or digging up, and there's lots of little bulbs and things on the side of it. So I didn't go into all that biology because I thought most of you guys would probably knew a lot of that stuff anyway.
Actually, just on that, John, with manual control, I think you once said that if you were to slash Arum, it would take six times a year for 6 years or something like that. Does that sound about right?
That's
in terms of
close.
Manual.
But you can exhaust the rootstock, but it's not easy. So eventually do it, and certainly like in the potato growing areas. With several rotary hoeings in preparation for a spud crop, they'll do it. But if they're trying anything where they're just having a single ploughing or rotary hoeing, the Arum survives through it pretty well. But it's not impossible to do it with rotary hoeing, but it's long and hard to do it organically.
Yeah. And question from Genevieve: if not using adjuvant, how many grams per litre are recommended for chlorsulfuron? Should we be recommending this rate to the community? And if you are using 2,4-D, what is the safe distance to a vineyard?
Okay, I'd probably stick with I think the 5 grams is probably overkill anyway. Certainly the experiments we've done, they've all guided around about the 20 grams per hectare and 5 grams per litre if you're spraying it till desk wet or the runoff sort of stage is about 50 grams per hectare. So, and the reason we put the spot spraying rates at double the boom spraying rates is that people don't spray as evenly when they're spot spraying as they do when they're boom spraying. So if you're a perfectly good spot sprayer, you could get away with half those rates. If you're a normal spot sprayer, because there's going to be some spots that get sort of half the rate and other spots get double the rate. So 5 grams covers a multitude of sins.
So what we recommend to the community in our kits, John, is 1 gram in 10 litres.
Yeah, which is 10 grams per 100, which is 100 grams per hectare, which is that's because the community are no good as all these good men contractors that are really experienced sprayers.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
And then
we've doubled it for the contractors, and we double it again for the home gardeners. Because they're hopeless. And again, there's very often they don't put on enough water, so that they'll give it a bit of a squirt around, and they're probably only putting on 500 litres per hectare of mix rather than 1,000 litres per hectare, which is people are talking about coverage, how important is coverage, and the main effect of coverage is just getting the amount of chemicals on the ground. And if you've got things like concentrated, you can go down to very low levels of water, but you just got to push the amount of chemical in each gram up there. So 100 grams per hectare is a good one for home gardeners. Contractors can get away with half that if they're doing a good job.
Great. Sorry, you
Can
go
I
ahead.
just, I just want to add something to that question, and that is that the cost of the of Pulse or whatever does put people off using that, but some people go and buy that and add that to their 1 gram per 10 litres. But if people don't at 1 gram per 10 litres spot spraying, and people aren't adding Pulse or anything like that, is that going to make very much difference to their success?
No, at 1 gram per 100 litres, or at 10 grams per 100 litres, 1 gram for 10 litres, that's basically overkill anyway. So putting any adjuvant in there is not going to make much difference at all.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because I think that can be a deterrent for people, the extra expense. Okay. Thanks, John.
And certainly, like even at 100 grams per 100 grams per litre, I think about 7 cents a gram. So that's only $7. And compared to your wages, it's just nothing. You can do a whole hectare for a cup of coffee's worth of chemicals. $7 worth of chemical, you do a whole hectare. So the rates are not for 2,4-D and paraquats does becoming an issue, but the sulfonylureas at the moment, they're just so cheap that you're probably better off just using sulfonylurea and not even worrying about the wetting agents.
Okay, thanks.
And I think I missed Scott's question before. Stickers, wetters, and penetrants, what is the difference?
Okay. Right. Theoretically, Pulse penetrant, which are the organosilicones, will take the surface tension down to much lower levels than your wetting agents, which is basically dishwashing liquid. So dishwashing liquid will take the surface tension down to a level, and it doesn't matter how much you put in there, you can't go any less than that. And at that sort of level, the water will bridge over the top of stomata, so it just remains on the outside of the leaf. When you get into the Pulse penetrants, it takes the surface tension down so low that it'll actually go through the holes of stomata, so actually get the chemical through the leaf and into the watery area of the plant, so inside the plant. So the outside of the plant's covered in wax, which is always hard to get chemical through. So if you've got something like Roundup, which is water soluble, getting it in through the stomata into the watery part of the leaf, which is inside of the leaf, generally gives you a very good result. So the penetrants just take the surface tension down to much lower levels than the wetting agents do. And the wetting agents, the main reason for the wetting agents is providing a bit of spread for the things like the paraquats and the spray seed and the bipyridols. But probably more importantly, is they stops a lot of droplet bounce. So when you spray a plant, the droplet comes out of the spray nozzle or the handgun and hits a leaf, and a lot of it actually bounces 2 or 3 times before it actually comes to stop. Whereas when you put the wetting agent in there, as soon as it hits, it just spreads and splatters and doesn't sort of bounce off and onto the ground. So if you're trying to get lots of leaf absorption with not too much going on the ground, the wetting agent does help it stop it getting through. The oils, again, are mainly made to get through waxy leaf surfaces. So if you've got plants that are very waxy, the oil dissolves in the wax, and so it's got one end dissolved in the wax and the other end dissolved in the herbicide, and that helps it get through the waxy layers rather than having to sort of suck in through the stomata. So I guess that's the three. And then things like uptake, which is the other one I mentioned there, is a mixture of oil plus wetter. So it basically helps it spread and also helps get a bit in through the waxy layers of the surface of the leaf. So I think that pretty much covers it. For those, there's a few old contractors there. You can probably remember back in the old days, and particularly if you had a Kero fridge, you had a little funnel that had a little fine gauze on the bottom of it, and you could pour your petrol through or your kerosene through, and all the water would sit on top of the gauze, and all the petrol would go through, because petrol's got a much lower surface tension than the water does. So you could sort of fill up your fridge without getting water into your fridge or into your little mower. And those little holes in that gauze that was in your petrol funnel are the same size as stomata. So the water just sort of bridges over the top of those holes and stops on top of the funnel, and the petrol goes through. If you put pulse in there, then the water goes through those holes, and you end up with water in your fridge or water in your Honda.
Cool. And then next question from Brooke. If 1 gram in 10 litres chlorsulfuron is enough to kill arums, should we keep using the pulse on dewy mornings or when there is leftover moisture on leaves from a past rainfall event?
Okay. Generally, if there's moisture on the leaf, the main issue there is as soon as you spray it, all the moisture runs off and takes all the chemical with it. So that just means you're not getting chemical onto the leaf. So spraying dry leaves is always better. And pulse makes it worse. All the wetting agents make it worse because it reduces the surface tension, so you get more runoff more quickly. So if you're in wet conditions, wetting agent would be worse for you. And if you're using 1 gram in 10 litres, then I suspect you probably don't need wetting agent anyway. You're probably better off just to spray it a bit more and make sure it gets totally wet, which means you're getting more chemical onto the plant itself. So you're getting the maximum amount onto the plant, and all the water on the plant is coming out of your spray tank, rather than sitting there from dew or rain or something that's been wet there. It's just diluting what you're putting on, because the plant will only hold so much water on its leaf, and the more chemical you have in that water, the better the control you'd expect to get.
Great. And from Genevieve, if you're using 2,4-D, what is a safe distance to a vineyard? I know this will depend on wind and surface inversion, but does John have a rule of thumb?
Okay. If the wind's away from the vineyard, then sort of like 0.5 metre is fine. So you can spray right up to the fence line if the wind's blowing away from it. Basically, drift just doesn't go upstream at all. If you're neutral to unstable or stable air conditions where the smoke is going directly upwards from where you're spraying or in the paddock, then sort of 10 metres would be rare to get effects, and 100 metres would be more than adequate, even when you've got significant winds there. Even in sort of like 20 or 30 kilometre-an-hour winds, it's rare that you'll go more than sort of 20 metres from the point of application. It does depend a bit on your spray. Your spraying machine, and I guess most people think the hand sprayers put out less drift than the boom sprayers do, but very often that's not the case. A lot of the hand sprayers, while they put out lots of big drops, they also put out lots of little drops as well. So having a hand spray doesn't really solve it. You're better off, you're better off boom spraying, because then you know what the size of the droplets are going out there. Is generally fine. And if you're telling people if you went to 100 metres, you'd have have 80 metres up your sleeve.
Right, perfect, John. This might be our last question. I'm just conscious of time. And Scott's asking about coverage. Should I spray at the base of the arum plant as well as the leaves for translocation through to the roots?
Arum's quite good at collecting sort of chemical and channeling it down the inside of its leaf onto the base of the plant, and that's why spray seed works well, because it just goes down and burns the top of the corm off. Most of the absorption is going to go in through the leaves, and most will go through the younger leaves rather than the old leaves. So spraying the leaves is certainly the best way, but basically, the more water you can get onto the plant, or the better coverage you got. Basically, better coverage just means you've got more chemical on there. But you can swap chemical for rates. So if you wanted a gram per 100 litres, a gram per 10 litres, if you got sort of 50% coverage, you're probably going to get a reasonable sort of a job with 2,4-D or metsulfuron. With paraquat you won't, because with paraquat you're basically relying on hitting every portion of the leaf, because it's a contact herbicide and only kills sort of a centimetre or so around each spot. So anything that's more than a centimetre away from where your chemicals hit is not going to go. For going into the roots, you do need really high rates of chemical to start getting significant amounts going in through the roots. So while it's useful, it's not very effective at getting chemical into the roots. Like you can get it, if you didn't spray the leaves, if you just sprayed the ground, at say 100 grams or more, the best you might get is a bit of yellowing in the plant. So 100 grams on the ground, if you just spraying the ground around the base of the plant, it'd be about the same as putting on, probably 1 or 2 grams per hectare. So probably 50 times less effective than getting it on the leaves. So yeah, there's very little point in spraying the ground outside of the. It's not like picloram or Taunton or something like that, where you spray the plant and then you spray sort of a buffer area around the outside to get the picloram in the soil to be absorbed by the roots. So basically, the metsulfurons and the chlorsulfurons don't hang around long enough to be useful, and you're not putting up lots of little suckers or side shoots that are going to come up sort of a metre away from the plant. So I suppose it's a little bit different to blackberry and gorse and those sorts of things, where you do get suckers and some of the eucalypts, but for Arum lily, it's basically what gets onto the leaf will be 90% of what you're going to get into the plant.
Cool. Yep. All right. Very last question, John. We've got like 2 minutes to answer this, but how early in the Arum lily's development can we start spraying it?
Got no idea. We're having a bit of a chat about this before we started. Nearly all our experiments have been done when Arum lily is flowering, because very often Arum lily occurs in bushland. And if it's not flowering, it's really hard to find. Rick reckons he's got his eye, and he can find it at 100 metres even when it's not flowering. So good on you. Nearly all the experimental stuff has been done at flowering. Basically, I suppose the thing to put in the back of your mind is under an Arum lily stand, we can have about 100 tonnes per hectare of root material. And so very often the issue is how do you get enough chemical in through the leaves to kill 100 tonnes of biomass? And so that's very often what might take you a year or two if you're going into an area that's never been treated before. You just haven't got enough leaf area there in order to absorb enough chemical to get enough chemical in there to kill the kilos of biomass under the ground. So if you had so for the little seedlings and that sort of stuff, you could probably spray them quite early, because they've got a little tiny cormel on the bottom, or that on the bottom, sort of thing the size of a pea, and most of that's in the leaf anyway as it germinates. And then sort of you could spray quite early in the season. Once you got to maximum leaf area, I'd say maximum leaf area is the obvious time when you got the maximum amount of absorptive areas, get the maximum amount of chemical in to kill the enormous amount of root that's underneath the soil. So it's really just being able to get that chemical into the soil, and I say metsulfuron does go through the soil a bit, but it's not very effective. It's not a really good soil applied herbicide. So while we do get a bit going through the roots, it's not very effective in getting roots. So basically, you need the maximum amount of leaf in order to get the maximum grams of active into the plant to kill the maximum number of tonnes of chemical, or maximum number of tonnes of rhizome under the ground. And with both 2,4-D and chlorsulfuron, the plant does break it down. So it'll start breaking it down from the day you spray it. And then when it's broken it down enough, then whatever tube is left will come and germinate next year. And so it's very often some of these very heavy infestations, particularly in the swampy type areas, it might take you 2 or 3 years to get the tuber down small enough so you've got enough leaf area on the top to actually kill the root system that's underneath it.
Perfect. Awesome. Oh, thanks, John. That's really great info. 1 minute to spare, so fantastic.
Good.
On time.
Well done.
Thanks so much, everyone. If you have more questions that come up today or anything that was missed, please send myself an email, or I'll pass on John's email if that's cool, John. And we'll get those answered. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
And keep going with it. I know sometimes you feel like you're pouring cold water onto the Arum lily control, but it is worth doing. And if you can stop it spreading, it's nice to keep it contained long enough until we get some really useful biocontrol to help you out. So you're very aware of the damage that it causes to the bush, and so anything you can do to reduce it is well worthwhile. Even though we're fighting a war at the moment with the tools we've got, we're really struggling. So we need a few more tools, and that'll probably happen over the next few years, but certainly not next year.
All right. Holding out hope. Thanks, John.
Good.
See you later, everybody. Cheers.